You built a bomb shelter for toddlers, Calder. Now your twins are dead because of it. That's what Orla Vexley said to my face, 2 hours after the fire. She stood behind the yellow tape, arms folded like she was the one grieving, not the one who gave the order. That was her way. Blame the fire on the structure, not the match. And never mind that she lit the match. Orla Vexley, president of the Valawind Hollow Architectural Compliance Board, always led with appearances. To her, my fireproof steel and polymer playroom wasn't a safety measure. It was an eyesore, a threat to historical cohesion. She wanted it gone long before it ever caught flame. What she never expected was that the same ugly structure had surveillance-grade sensors tracking every flicker of heat that killed my daughters. They thought I was just a widower with a welding kit. They forgot I was the guy who designed wildfire-resistant shelters for the U.S. Forestry Service, and that every panel of the nest was calibrated to survive temperatures that would incinerate a Jeep. They didn't realize the thing they mocked would end up recording everything. Subscribe now if you've ever been told you don't belong here for trying to protect your family. What happened to my girls wasn't a tragedy. It was a sequence, and I had every line of data. My name is Calder Reith. For 7 years, I worked on classified fireproofing systems for defense contractors. I walked away from all of it after Mira, my wife, burned alive in a chemical fire. I left the Black Budget Labs and moved to Valawind Hollow for peace. For the twins. The nest was my peace, my redemption. Built from the same materials Mira helped develop, synthetic foam barriers, breathable insulation, structural alloys that don't even melt in a jet turbine. The HOA didn't care. Orla cared even less. She called it military, brutalist, non-compliant. But I followed every code: zoning, utility clearance, child safety setbacks. Even submitted it for aesthetic review, rejected without hearing, denied because it wasn't wood. Still, I kept quiet. I thought the structure would speak for itself. It did, until Orla started organizing brush burns again. Unauthorized, no permits, just piles of dead trimmings and dry leaves behind the greenbelt line, feet from my yard. I filed reports. The HOA board ignored them. Orla laughed in my face. Then the port cover on the nest's southern ventilation panel went missing. I'd sealed it the week before, but the latch had been cracked, like someone forced it open and didn't know what they were doing. That morning, I was in the shed welding a bracing plate for a neighbor's railing. My daughters, Ari and Ellen, were inside the nest, napping. I'd just switched on the internal white noise feed. Mira's old lullabies, simulated rainforest sounds. They always slept better that way. At 11:07 a.m., a gust blew in from the west. At 11:08, HOA. Landscapers lit the brush pile without checking wind speed. At 11:09, smoke reached the dislodged vent. The nest was airtight, but smoke doesn't need fire, just a crack and a current. I smelled it before I saw it. By the time I pulled both girls out, Ari's pulse was gone. Ellen gasped twice, then nothing. Orla didn't cry, she didn't run. She stood by the burn pile with her clipboard and said those words like they were a legal clause. Your twins are dead because of it. Except, the nest wasn't the cause. It was the witness. Each sensor pinged back to a secured server in my office. Temperature, air quality, external humidity, directional fire surge. Everything matched what I feared. The HOA's fire, from their property line, entered the vent they had tampered with. I showed the marshal. I didn't say much, just handed over the data and played the drone footage. The match was visible. The ignition point was clear. He didn't flinch, just pressed his radio and said, "Probable cause confirmed. Detain the HOA president. Now." 3 minutes later, they put Orla Vexley in cuffs. And that's how the woman who burned my daughters alive learned what a fireproof structure actually records. The first warning sign wasn't the citation. It was the way Orla Vexley looked at my daughters when they laughed too loud in the front yard. She'd slow her pace just enough to make you feel it. Clipboard in hand, her khaki HOA vest neatly pressed, walking her so-called inspection loop like it was a military patrol. She'd pause by my gate, narrow her eyes at the nest, and jot something down without looking up. The citation came a week later. Unapproved auxiliary structure composed of non-harmonious exterior materials, it read. The HOA seal stamped in bold, like that made it holy. They didn't call it unsafe, didn't mention height restrictions or utility conflicts, just that it didn't look like the rest of the neighborhood. That was the problem. It wasn't made of wood. It didn't have pastel shutters or fake window boxes. It didn't pretend to be a mini colonial cottage. It was silver gray, curved, sealed, and rooted into 4 concrete piers with zero contact to trees, fences, or overhead hazards. The HOA didn't care that it was safer than every other playhouse on the block. Orla only cared that it didn't match. She left that first violation notice under the door latch with a passive-aggressive post-it stuck to the envelope. Let's talk about alternatives that better reflect the community's vision. I read it with one daughter on my hip and the other gripping my knee. Neither of them could read the words, but they both knew what a pink notice meant. They'd seen our neighbor cry when she got one about her garden trellis. I didn't respond to Orla. Instead, I submitted an appeal through the official portal, included structural schematics, thermal resistance data, wind load analysis, not because I thought it would change anything, but because I wanted it on record that I'd tried. The denial came in 48 hours. No counter-argument, just another form letter, this one signed directly by Orla. Structure does not align with pre-approved residential design palette. And that was the beginning of the pressure. First came the fines, $50 a day for non-removal, then a secondary violation for visual obstruction of greenbelt view. The nest sat 23 feet from the fence line, compliant by every local ordinance. But that didn't stop her from filing. Next came the walk-bys. Orla stopped pretending it was coincidence. Every time she passed, she paused longer. Sometimes she spoke loud enough for the kids to hear. Such a shame when children grow up thinking rules don't apply to them. I caught her once, taking pictures of the structure's corner where the vent sat tucked under the eave. She didn't ask permission, didn't even flinch when I stepped out of the workshop. "Just documenting violations," she said flatly. "You're trespassing." Her eyes didn't move from her phone. The board has visual access rights to any structure facing public use property. I didn't argue, just turned around and quietly disabled the external cameras. I'd installed better ones, covert, solar, built into the decorative edging, the kind that didn't flash or hum or warn anyone they were being watched. It got worse. When the girls played in the driveway, she called in a report for unsupervised minors near HOA vehicle paths. When my nanny brought over lunch in a brown paper bag, Orla filed a complaint for non-residential waste disposal. Each infraction felt petty, almost laughable, but the weight of them, like static, never stopped. And I knew from her pattern, she wasn't trying to win by law. She was trying to wear me down. So I did what I always do when someone escalates with chaos. I built quietly. I documented everything. I mapped foot traffic heat maps from her patrols. I set up low-angle passive IR sensors by the gate and under the greenbelt fence line. The nest wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a pressure point. And I knew, eventually, she'd push too hard. I just didn't expect her to do it with fire. Not yet. Not like that. But the way she looked at my girls that day, the way she spoke to them like they were intruders in their own yard, I knew something had already shifted in her head. And I knew the house wasn't what she wanted gone. Desmond Farr looked like a man who'd been holding in a scream for 2 years. I first saw him during one of those weekly HOA inspections, clipboard in hand, maintenance vest zipped halfway up, sweat clinging to the back of his neck as he measured fence heights with a laser tool. He didn't have Orla's posture, no smugness, just someone doing a job he clearly didn't want to be seen doing. The day he walked up my driveway, I assumed he was there to photograph the nest again. He wasn't. "I'm just here to log boundary footage," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Routine compliance sweep, new board order." "Let me guess," I said. "Orla wants to confirm the nest casts a shadow." He gave a weak smile that never reached his eyes. "Something like that." Desmond hovered on the edge of my concrete pad, hesitating. Behind him, the greenbelt stretched out, flat, dry, leaf-covered. A rake job away from a fire hazard. The HOA hadn't maintained it in weeks. "You got a problem with that brush line?" I asked, his shoulders tensed. "Not officially, but unofficially?" He glanced around, then stepped closer. "Off the record? I filed a warning last month, said it needed clearing, no open burns near structures, got buried, no reply." "Buried by who?" "Same person who authorizes my contract renewals." That was the first crack. Desmond wasn't like the rest of them. He had the tools, sure, the laser level, the moisture gauge, but not the stomach. He looked at the nest like a father might, not with judgment, with worry. He turned back toward the greenbelt. You know Orla wants that structure gone before the next quarterly. I've noticed. She's talking about calling it a safety risk, backed by professional witness. That witness would be me. And would you call it unsafe? He paused. I haven't seen the inside. You're not going to. He didn't argue. Desmond stayed quiet a long time, scanning the line where my property met the open field. Then he lifted his phone and started a slow, steady pan with the camera, not toward my yard, but toward the overgrown pile of trimmings stacked 10 feet from the HOA's maintenance shed. What are you doing? I asked. Logging proximity documentation. His voice dropped a little. Just in case. Just in case what? Desmond tapped the screen, saved the clip, and didn't answer. The next time I saw him was at the emergency HOA meeting, 2 days before the fire. Orla stood at the front of the room, her voice sharp and self-congratulatory. In line with the community's aesthetic integrity, we've approved a scheduled soil purification burn near the southeast border. Our landscaping team will handle it. There were murmurs, not because of the burn, because of the timing. High wind forecasts had just been issued. Every phone in the room had a red banner, Fire Watch in effect. Desmond was in the back row, slouched in a folding chair, flipping through a clipboard. When Orla mentioned the location, adjacent to my yard, I saw him flinch. He didn't speak up. He didn't raise his hand. He just glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Afterward, I caught him in the parking lot. You know that's a risk, I said. She'll do it anyway, he muttered. She says it's symbolic, cleansing the soil. She knows what's buried there? He blinked. Buried? Not literal, I said. Just a promise. Desmond's throat tightened. You've got kids in that structure, Calder. You should move them. Even if you're right. Even if it's all safe. It won't matter. That's the point, I said. She doesn't want it to matter. He didn't deny it. Instead, he opened his bag, pulled out a flash drive, and shoved it into my hand without a word. Then he walked away before I could ask what was on it. I didn't look at it until the next morning. By then, the burn was already scheduled. The flash drive held 2 things. A flagged inspection report Desmond had filed, warning of fire code violations on the HOA's previous burns, and a 54-second video clip. In the clip, Orla Vexley stood beside the brush pile, gesturing with her hand. Doesn't matter what the manual says, light it. Just make sure the wind doesn't change. That wind changed 5 days later. They lit the fire at 10:56 a.m. No permits, no advance notice. Not even a heads up in the HOA group chat. Just 2 hired landscapers in faded polos and dust masks, standing at the edge of the greenbelt with a jerry can and a lighter. I saw them from my back window. One looked unsure. The other had his phone out, pointed at a voice memo. Orla's voice. Light it now. We're behind schedule. The nest sat 22 feet from that pile, built on piers, surrounded by fire-resistant stone gravel, outwardly impervious. Inside, my daughters were watching a cartoon. My nanny, Miriam, was reading on the patio. The moment I saw the first flash of flame, I stepped out the back door. What the hell are you doing? I shouted across the fence. The younger of the 2 workers flinched. The other just shrugged. Following HOA instructions, we were told it was pre-approved. I moved fast, through the side gate, down the narrow slope, over the uneven gravel that separated my lot from the greenbelt's edge. The flames weren't high yet, but they were dry-fed and twisting fast. I could smell resin and oil in the smoke. Put it out, I barked. They looked at me like I'd spoken another language. And then I saw her, Orla, standing 30 yards back on the path, arms folded, watching like she was admiring a painting. Her lips barely moved when she saw me approach. This is community property, Mr. Wraith. Your approval is not required. The fire zone is within 30 feet of my home. That's a code violation. The structure in question is non-compliant with the architectural charter and doesn't qualify as a protected dwelling. The hell it doesn't. There are children in there. Orla blinked slowly. Then, perhaps you should have followed the rules. I stared at her, trying to calculate how much of this was malice and how much was delusion. And for a second, I wondered if she even understood what she'd set in motion. Miriam came running out the back door, coughing. There's smoke. Inside, she yelled, panicked. The girls! Calder, the alarm's going off. I ran. Every step back across the gravel felt like time was stretching, warping. The nest had a triple-sealed vent system, fail-safes built in, unless one of the ports had been tampered with. And one had. I'd noticed it 4 days earlier. The external vent cover on the south wall had been loosened. At the time, I thought maybe the wind or one of the landscapers had knocked it. I reseated it, but didn't re-weld. Now I could see the thin trail of gray smoke threading through that exact port, rising like a ribbon. I reached the nest and slammed the override panel with my palm. The outer lock hissed, disengaged. Inside, the air was thick, hot. My lungs burned on the first breath. Ari was curled by the far corner, limp. Ellen was crying, gasping, trying to shake her sister awake. Miriam screamed behind me. I pulled them both out one at a time, arms shaking, laid them on the lawn. My voice was gone, torn by heat and ash. Miriam was already calling 911. Ari didn't move. I started compressions, counted, paused, tried again. Nothing. Ellen coughed once, then went still. Miriam sobbed. The neighbor's dog barked 3 houses down. Somewhere in the distance, the fire truck sirens started. By the time they arrived, the brush fire had died out on its own. Just a pile of wet earth and black stubs now. Contained by HOA standards. But the damage had already been done, and Orla was still standing there, behind the tape the firefighters strung up, talking to a board member like this was an inconvenience. When the paramedics zipped up the bags, she didn't flinch. I warned you, she said, her voice calm, almost bored. That structure wasn't appropriate for children. It wasn't just grief I felt in that moment. It was precision, because somewhere deep beneath the pain, my training clicked in. The data from those internal sensors, still intact, still logging, still pinging my server. I looked at the nest, scorched but standing. It hadn't failed. She had. I didn't speak at the scene, not to the police, not to the fire chief, not to the neighbors who stood slack-jawed on their porches, clutching mugs like they might wake up from this. I didn't have to. The nest had already done the talking. While the paramedics covered my daughters, and while Orla Vexley muttered phrases like negligent materials and non-compliant construction, I walked into my home, locked the door, and turned on my office terminal. The system was still online. The Nest's data module had uploaded to the backup server at 10:59 a.m., just as the vent breach occurred, time-stamped, auto-encrypted, and remotely duplicated across 3 nodes. I watched the temperature map play out like a slow-motion autopsy. At 10:56 a.m., ambient temperature outside was 82 degrees, inside 74 degrees. At 10:57, external fire detection spiked. Ignition source detected at 13 feet south-southeast. By 10:58, smoke. Particulates began registering inside the unit, micron-level soot infiltration. The breach point was the southern ventilation port, which had been sealed, or rather, it was supposed to be sealed. The pressure inside dropped slightly, enough to suggest the port had been physically dislodged. The Nest's backup sensors recorded a variance in barometric isolation, a telltale sign of tampering. I leaned forward and checked the camera logs. The Nest had 2 exterior lenses. Most people didn't know they were cameras. I'd embedded them into the frame itself, behind UV-tinted shielding. One covered the south approach, the brush line. The other faced the eastern property border. Neither was meant to be high-res, just movement tracking, thermal signatures, emergency triangulation. But today, they gave me everything. At 10:54, Orla appeared in the far corner of the south frame. She stood near the landscapers, pointing with her right hand. They hesitated. One checked his phone, then nodded. At 10:55, they opened the jerry can. At 10:56, flame. Then came the wind. The report had warned about a westerly gust around mid-morning. I'd seen it, so had Desmond. But no one on that HOA board had bothered to reschedule. By 10:57, the smoke funneled straight toward the nest's south wall. The camera caught it, thick, aggressive, horizontal. It didn't rise into the sky. It slammed into the structure like a wave, and right there, at the seam of the vent port, I saw it. A shift. Not the usual thermal ripple of expanding heat. A mechanical shift. The cover snapped open, not cleanly, not fully, but enough. Like a latch had already been weakened. I paused the footage, rewound, 3 days earlier, motion alert, 2:13 p.m. A figure, no vest, no landscaper gear, just khakis and a clipboard. Orla. She bent over near the nest's south edge, out of frame for only 6 seconds. When she stood up, she wiped her hand on her pant leg and walked off. No tools, no gloves, just 6 seconds. I knew the vent system. I designed it to resist wind shear, animal tampering, even hail. But the manual latch could be nudged open by someone who knew where to press, and didn't care about breaking the hinge. I toggled over to the server log for structural sensors. Sure enough, mechanical anomaly detected. Logged that day. Low priority alert. I hadn't noticed. No one had. Until now. I watched the rest of the data play out like a timeline carved in fire. Internal oxygen depletion started at 10:58. CO levels peaked at 11:01. At 11:03, child weight motion signatures slowed. By 11:05, the log fell silent. My daughters had died while I was 30 feet away. But not without witnesses. The nest didn't fail. It had tracked everything. Time of breach, direction of smoke flow, structural integrity fluctuations, thermal thresholds, my girls' final movements. It had even recorded their breathing patterns until the audio sensors dimmed out, beneath the roar of particulate interference. I sat, back in my chair, hands still trembling, staring at the data I wished I didn't have. Then I pulled Desmond's flash drive from my drawer and plugged it in. 2 files. The first was his buried inspection warning about the burn site, dated 3 months earlier. The second was the field video. There she was again. Orla, smiling, saying it out loud. Doesn't matter what the manual says, light it, just make sure the wind doesn't change. I clicked compile. The case file started to build. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the grief. That came later. At first, all I could feel was stillness, like my body hadn't gotten the message that the world had ended. I sat in front of the screen long after the fire marshal left, surrounded by nothing but quiet beeping logs and sensor readouts ticking away like a digital eulogy. The nest was built to withstand anything. I'd used tech pulled from wildfire bunkers, stuff no HOA reviewer would have understood if they tried. The idea was to over-engineer it, to eliminate even a sliver of risk. Mira had died in fire. I wasn't going to let the girls grow up without her and still meet the same end. But I had missed something. I'd guarded against storm winds, gas leaks, electrical shorts. What I hadn't accounted for was sabotage. That was the word I couldn't stop circling back to. It felt heavy, maybe even melodramatic, but it fit. Orla hadn't lit the fire herself. She'd delegated it, sanitized it, hid behind policy and phrases like aesthetic continuity and environmental renewal. But the truth was simpler than all of that. She wanted the nest gone, and she didn't care what else went with it. By sunrise, the data file was complete. I'd cross-referenced every sensor log, every timestamp, every camera feed and visual anomaly. I created a frame-by-frame timeline. The last few seconds of video weren't something I could bring myself to rewatch, but they were necessary. The field data proved the smoke came from HOA grounds. The thermal vector data proved the vent breach happened only after Orla's earlier visit. The soot density and chemical signature matched the precise wood composite used in HOA landscaping mulch. And Desmond's video, blurry though it was, caught Orla's voice authorizing it. It wasn't conjecture. It wasn't assumption. It was proof. I backed the file up in 3 separate locations: external SSD, encrypted cloud, and a second off-grid backup hidden inside the basement tool vault. I also sent a copy to an old contact at the state fire marshal's office, Chief Investigator Marla Corin. I didn't ask for anything, just labeled the file. Critical structure fire, civilian casualties, evidence attached. Then I shut the laptop and walked into the yard. The nest still stood. Its exterior was scorched, but the structure hadn't failed. The glass window was spiderwebbed with heat fracture. The metal plating was darkened and blistered, in patches. But it was intact, still bolted down, still anchored. The fire hadn't destroyed it. The smoke had seeped through one weakness. That's what got them. That, and Orla. I walked around to the south vent and examined it up close. The latching mechanism was bent outward, subtle but unmistakable. Not wind damage, not pressure warp. A clean directional bend, like someone had pried it with a tool, or more likely, bare hands using weight leverage. It hadn't taken much, 6 seconds, maybe less. I leaned against the structure, pressing my palm flat to its surface. The metal was cold now, lifeless. But I could still feel their presence inside. Ari's little flashlight drawings, Ellen's favorite sticker books taped to the inner wall. Nothing inside had burned. That was the cruelest part. They hadn't died in fire. They died in safety. Because someone had stripped that safety away. I turned when I heard footsteps. It was Desmond, standing on the edge of my driveway, hands in his jacket pockets. "You saw the report?" I asked. He nodded. "Twice. She ever tell you what she did here?" "She didn't need to. Not anymore." "You ready to talk?" He took a long breath. "I'll say what needs to be said. But if I do, it's not just her. The whole board buried my warnings." "I know. You'll burn the whole thing down." "I won't have to," I said. "The data will do that for me." Desmond didn't smile. He just looked down at the gravel, then back at the nest. "I have a copy too," he said, "just in case." We stood there for a long time, side by side, saying nothing, just letting the weight of it settle. Desmond didn't come to work the next day. The HOA meeting that followed was moved indoors. No cameras, no outside attendees, and no live minutes posted. A printed agenda was taped to the community center doors. Standard administrative review, no public comment. Business as usual, except nothing was usual anymore. I knew what that kind of silence meant. A scramble, internal damage control. Orla and the board trying to figure out how much of the truth had leaked and how fast it was spreading. I didn't show up either, but Desmond did come to see me that night. He arrived just after 9, hood up, moving like someone who didn't want to be seen. His face was pale, his mouth tight. He didn't speak until I'd closed the door behind him. "They're trying to pin the fire on you," he said quietly. "The board's rewriting the narrative, calling the nest a hazard, saying it drew in the fire like a chimney." "Let me guess," I said. "They want you to confirm it." Desmond nodded. "They drafted a statement for me to sign. Failure to comply with aesthetic design policies resulted in airflow irregularities." I stared at him. "That's not even how fire works. They don't care. It sounds technical. It sounds official. And you didn't sign it." He shook his head. "I told them I needed to review my field logs before I could make any declaration. That bought me a day, maybe 2. And then what?" Desmond pulled a folder from his jacket. "Then I bring this to the fire marshal myself." Inside were printed copies of every code complaint he'd filed, handwritten notes from his inspections, and something I hadn't seen before, a photograph. It was a time-stamped still from a week before the fire, showing Orla crouched at the nest's southern wall, hand extended toward the vent. "You printed this?" I asked. He nodded. "Pulled it from the HOA maintenance archive, quietly." "Won't they notice?" "They'll think it got overwritten. The live feed rotates every 7 days. But I copied it the morning after it happened. Something about it didn't sit right." I studied the photo, her posture, the angle of her wrist, the way her fingers braced against the siding, not to steady herself, but to apply pressure. She hadn't been inspecting. She'd been prying. I looked up. "You willing to go on record?" Desmond hesitated. "They'll pull my license. They'll do worse if this buries you with them." He didn't answer at first, then, finally, "You know, when I first took this job, I thought it'd be quiet, just measuring fences, checking gutters, nothing like this. This wasn't supposed to happen. But it did." His voice cracked slightly. "And your kids—" He didn't finish. I took the folder from him and placed it beside my compiled case file. The evidence pile was growing. It was no longer just sensor data and structural footage. It was a chain, each piece reinforcing the next. Not circumstantial, not speculative. Undeniable. Desmond rubbed his face with both hands. "You think the fire marshal will act on this?" "They will, the moment they see the logs. But it's not just about the logs anymore. It's about showing pattern, negligence, intent." "I'm not sure I can say the last one." "You won't have to," I said. "You'll just say what you saw. I'll show what she did." He let out a slow breath. "I should have said something earlier, should have warned you louder. You warned me enough to start recording." He looked down, jaw clenched. "They didn't deserve that." "No, they didn't." We sat in silence a while after that, the weight of it all pressing down on the room. Not grief, not exactly. Grief had its own shape. This was something colder, more surgical. The moment before an incision, when everything stands still and the blade hovers. Desmond stood to leave. Tomorrow morning? I'll meet you there, County Fire Investigation Bureau. He gave a short nod, turned, and left through the side door. The house felt hollow after he was gone. I sat back down at the desk and opened the file again, reviewing every frame, every number, every pixel. Tomorrow, I'd show them what Orla Vexley never, all but expected to be seen. The County Fire Investigation Bureau didn't look like much from the outside, just a beige concrete building behind a row of sycamores, with a faded badge etched into the door and a camera hanging above it like an old crow. I parked across the street. Desmond arrived 5 minutes later in a different car than usual. He looked worse than before. No sleep, shallow breaths, shoulders hunched forward like he was trying to disappear into himself. But he nodded at me when I approached. That was enough. Inside, a clerk took our names and led us to a room labeled Civilian Submissions, Evidence Triage. The air smelled like toner and burnt coffee. The walls were lined with whiteboards and plastic bins of unsorted fire reports. We didn't wait long. Chief Investigator Marla Corrin stepped in like she'd already read our names on a watch list. She was in her late 40s, gray at the roots, postured like someone who still wore her belt even when off duty. Her eyes skipped the small talk. "You're the homeowner from Valowin Hollow?" she asked. "Yes." "And you're the contracted code inspector?" Desmond cleared his throat. "Not for long." She nodded. "Let's see what you've got." I slid the hard drive across the table. It's all there. Sensor logs from the structure's environmental suite, thermal data, chemical traces, footage from embedded exterior cams, and metadata timestamps. Everything's mirrored and hash verified. She didn't blink. "And what exactly am I looking for?" "Origin of fire," I said. "Trajectory, breach point, timing. You'll find 2 separate ignition sources confirmed within HOA-managed property lines, and proof that the HOA president authorized an unpermitted burn during an active red flag warning." Desmond pulled out his folder. "These are my internal inspection reports, predated. I filed 2 warnings about proximity risks and unauthorized storage of flammable materials, both ignored. I've also included a photo showing the HOA president tampering with the structure days before the fire." Corrin took the file. She didn't open it immediately, just looked at us both like she was scanning for holes. "And your relationship to the victims?" she asked me. "They were my daughters." Silence fell like a hammer. Corrin finally sat, opened her laptop, and plugged in the drive. The screen filled with segmented visuals, graphs, heat maps, sensor waveforms, a 3D model of the nest, color-coded to show pressure deltas and chemical shifts. Then she clicked into the video archive. Orla's voice came through the speaker almost immediately. "Light it. Just make sure the wind doesn't change." Corrin leaned in. "This is her?" Desmond nodded. "Yes, taken from my maintenance field phone. She didn't know I was recording." Corrin clicked through the footage. The landscape lit up. Ember lines pushed by wind. Smoke curling into the fence line. Then, slamming sideways against the nest's shell, another frame showed the vent door cracking open. "Is this when the breach occurred?" she asked. "Exactly. Barometric isolation logs support it," I said. "She tampered with that port days earlier. Footage confirms it." Corrin watched for another 30 seconds, then stopped the video. "This is enough for me to open a formal investigation," she said. "If your timestamps hold and the witness statements line up with the data, I'll be filing for an emergency subpoena." Desmond looked down at his hands. Corrin didn't waste time. "You understand this isn't just an HOA violation anymore. We're talking criminal negligence, possibly felony endangerment resulting in death." "I understand," I said. "I need you both to sign affidavits, provide chain of custody certification, and prepare for potential grand jury summons." I nodded again. "Whatever it takes." Corrin paused before leaving. "You should know something. We've had issues with Valowin Hollow before. Fires, insurance claims, false permit pulls. Never enough to act on. Until now." She left the room without another word. Desmond looked at me. "That's it then?" "No," I said quietly. "That's the start." We walked out into the daylight like we'd just exited a bunker. It was quieter now, still, but I knew that wouldn't last. The moment Corin made her call, the clock started ticking. I spent the next 48 hours preparing for war, not the kind with lawyers and courtrooms, not yet. First came the groundwork, quiet, methodical, airtight. I'd fought fires that spread without warning. Now, I was fighting one made of lies, and this time, I was building the perimeter before the flames got close. I didn't leave the house except for supplies. I didn't sleep more than 20 minutes at a time. I printed everything: the heat maps, vent sensor logs, air composition variances. I triple-checked every frame of footage, labeled every spike, every timestamp, every audio trigger. Then I prepared the second layer, something the HOA wouldn't see coming. I had mirrored the data 3 ways. One copy was now with the County Fire Bureau. Another was encrypted and stored on a public blockchain archive under a time-stamped ledger. The third was for public release. I opened my terminal and uploaded a compressed version of the evidence to a private cloud, password protected but ready. Alongside it, I drafted a short explanation, emotionless and surgical. Surveillance data recovered from a fireproof structure involved in fatal smoke exposure incident. Valawind Hollow HOA jurisdiction. I didn't plan to post it yet. Not unless they push back hard. But if they tried to bury the truth, if they came after me the way I knew Orla would, I'd let the whole world see it. On the second night, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. Lennox Dre, a fire systems integrator I'd worked with during my DoD contracting days. He picked up on the second ring. Calder, I need a validation chain, third-party expert confirmation on sensor logs, civilian-grade language but legally formatted. A pause. It's about the kids, isn't it? Yes. Send me everything. You'll have it back within 24. I sent the drive before I could second-guess it. The next morning, I got confirmation in the form of a notarized PDF. All data appears original, unaltered, and consistent with recorded environmental fire event behavior. Sensor fault is ruled out. Vent failure attributed to forced mechanical compromise. I smiled for the first time in days. Next, I prepped physical evidence. I removed the nest's south vent panel, carefully with gloves, and bagged it in a static sealed pouch. The metal showed clear warping along the hinge joint, with compression points suggesting leverage from outside. I documented the removal with photos, time-stamped, uploaded, then I went further. I reconstructed the burn trajectory using augmented modeling software, laid the HOA property map over the wind data from NOAA's historical archive. The gusts that carried the smoke into the nest's port had been clocked at 24 miles per hour at exactly 10:57 a.m. The brush pile had no windbreak, no shielding, no retardant perimeter. I wrote a line across the model in red, predicted fire line, based on HOA burn zone placement. The line went straight through the nest, and straight into the lives of my daughters. That evening, I called Desmond again. "You ready for tomorrow?" I asked. "I am now," he said. The rest of the board's pretending it never happened. Orla canceled the next public meeting, told the treasurer not to respond to inquiries. She won't cancel the next one. Desmond didn't ask what I meant. Maybe he didn't want to know. By midnight, I had every piece in place. I stored the panel evidence in a fireproof case. I printed copies of the inspection reports, labeled and bound. I loaded the drone footage into a presentation frame, cropped, silent, surgical. I knew what was coming. Orla wasn't going to surrender. She'd try to twist this, manipulate the community, reframe herself as the victim of a vengeful parent. But data doesn't flinch, and it doesn't lie. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to argue or demand or plead. I was going to show them what happened, exactly as it happened. And I was going to watch Orla Vexley try to speak over it, while the evidence burned through every word she had left. The meeting started at 6 p.m. sharp. No one was expecting me to walk in. The Valawind Hollow Community Hall wasn't built for tension. It was built for potlucks and budget updates, HOA elections and landscaping votes. The lights were soft, the folding chairs were clean. A pitcher of lemon water sat on the table beside the podium, like this was any other Thursday. But tonight wasn't any other Thursday. Orla Vexley stood at the front, her posture composed, dressed in slate gray like it might give her authority she hadn't earned. She held a folder in one hand and gestured with the other, speaking in calm, well-rehearsed tones. And while the recent tragedy has shaken our community, It's important we remain unified and avoid unnecessary speculation. The incident remains under review by the appropriate authorities. As of now, the structure in question has been deemed non-compliant under Section 4 of the Visual Design Charter and will be removed. Actually, I said, stepping through the back door, you may want to hold off on that. Every head turned. Orla froze mid-sentence. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment her lips parted, just enough for the confidence to slip. "Mr. Wraith," she said slowly, "this is a closed session. I'm aware, but the County Fire Investigation Bureau isn't." Gasps from the room. The board members looked at each other. Someone shifted in their seat. I walked to the front with the quiet steadiness of someone carrying a controlled burn. From my bag, I pulled a small tablet and a steel case, placed both on the podium beside her lemon water. "You said my daughter's deaths were an unfortunate byproduct of a non-compliant structure, that your burn was conducted safely, that the nest drew in smoke like a vacuum." She opened her mouth. I didn't let her speak. "This is a sealed vent panel from the nest. You'll notice the bend in the hinge, caused by manual pressure, someone forcing it open. Not wind, not wear, intentional breach." A few murmurs now. I tapped the tablet. The screen lit up. "Here's thermal footage from the exterior cameras embedded in the nest. As you can see," I pointed to the timestamp in the corner, "your landscapers lit the pile at 10:56 a.m. Within 90 seconds, a western gust carried the smoke in a direct line toward the structure. At 10:58, the port breaches. Smoke enters. At 11:01, internal oxygen drops below survivable levels. I stepped aside, letting the room absorb it. Desmond stood in the back, arms crossed, silent. His presence alone was a statement. Orla tried to recover. This is edited. You have no right to present this without legal review." "I filed it with the County Fire Bureau 48 hours ago. They opened a criminal investigation this morning. Your voice," I tapped again, played the short clip of her saying, "Light it, just make sure the wind doesn't change." "Was reviewed by 2 forensic audio analysts. Confirmed. No manipulation, no compression artifacts. It's real." A man near the front, Ed Roldan, the treasurer, stood up abruptly. "Orla, did you say that?" Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. "I have the inspection reports," I continued, "filed by Desmond, warning the board about that burn zone 3 months ago. You ignored them, buried them, and when he didn't support your rewrite of the narrative, you tried to pressure him into silence." Ed looked visibly ill. Someone else stood, then another. It was happening faster than I expected. "This isn't an HOA violation anymore," I said. "This is criminal negligence, and the evidence chain is complete. If you want to defend yourself, you'll do it in court." Orla finally found her voice. "You're doing this to punish me. You lost your daughters, and now you're trying to destroy the board." "No," I said, eyes locked on hers. "You did that. All I did was record it." The room went silent again. Outside, red and blue lights began to flash across the windows. They didn't knock. The glass doors at the back of the community hall slid open in unison, and 3 officers stepped inside, followed by a woman in a black utility vest bearing the gold badge of the County Fire Investigation Bureau, Investigator Corin. Her expression didn't change. Not when the room fell silent, not when half the board stood frozen mid-turn, and not when she walked directly toward the podium where Orla Vexley stood stiff and breathless. "Orla Ann Vexley," she said, voice steady and clear. "You are under investigation for criminal negligence resulting in civilian deaths and willful violation of State Fire Code under Section 9.3.7. You are being detained for questioning. Please step forward." Orla didn't move. Ed Roldan whispered something, but she shook her head and gripped the edge of the podium with whitening fingers. Her mouth twitched open, the words catching in her throat. "This is a mistake," she finally muttered. This was a community fire safety operation. I was following landscaping protocols." Corin didn't flinch. "We have documentation of your unauthorized directive, thermal surveillance showing proximity-based ignition, tampering indicators on a sealed residential structure, and a witness statement from your contracted inspector. You will have the opportunity to respond through legal counsel." The silence in the room was total. When one of the officers gently placed a hand on Orla's wrist, she jerked it back. Her composure cracked like ice. "You're all just letting him do this?" she snapped, looking around at the board. "You think he's not twisting the story? He lost his children, and now he wants to ruin mine." That last word landed wrong. You could feel the shift, like a string snapped somewhere in the ceiling, and everyone felt it fall. Corin's voice dropped, lower than before. "Your children are alive, Ms. Vexley." Orla's lip trembled, her shoulders tensed. She looked at me then, for the first time. Not the camera, not the screen, not the evidence. Me. But I had nothing left for her. I wasn't angry, I wasn't shouting, I wasn't even cold. I was done. She must have known it was over, because the fight drained out of her in a single blink. She stepped back from the podium and held her wrists out like she was surrendering a burden too heavy to explain. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the room. The officers guided her past the rows of folding chairs. She didn't struggle. She didn't look back. She just walked, head low, as the neighbors she once commanded sat stone-faced, watching her fall. Desmond met my eyes from the back of the room. He gave a single nod. As Corin followed the escort out, she paused by me. "The DA's office will contact you within 72 hours. I've flagged the case as high priority. If everything holds, you'll have formal charges announced within the week." "Thank you," I said. My voice was hoarse. I hadn't realized I hadn't spoken again until then. She gave a short nod and left without another word. The doors closed behind her. Nobody moved. Then slowly, quietly, people began to rise. Not frantically, not in chaos. Just one by one, walking out with quiet disbelief on their faces. Not shock at what Orla had done. Shock at how long they'd let her do it. Ed approached me last. His hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. "I didn't know," he said. I looked at him. "You didn't ask?" He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words didn't come. He lowered his gaze and left like the rest of them, folding chair legs squeaking behind him. Desmond stayed behind. He walked up next to me and looked out through the window where the red and blue lights faded into the distance. "You think she'll actually face time?" "She'll face something," I said. "Maybe not enough, but enough to make it matter." He nodded. Outside, the streetlights hummed to life. The hall grew dim behind us, empty now, chairs out of place, water pitchers sweating onto the podium, a clipboard forgotten in a corner, the kind of silence that comes after something breaks, and the first breath after. The new nest stood exactly where the old one had, same dimensions, same footprint. But this one wasn't for Ari and Ellen. This one was for everyone. The frame was open now, no longer sealed. The walls were paneled with fire-resistant displays detailing the timeline of that day. The wind shift, the ignition point, the breach. A burn-proof capsule containing sensor logs rested in the center under glass. Around it, neighbors walked through in silence, reading, pausing, some of them crying. The memorial had been approved unanimously. The HOA board had been dissolved within a week of Orla's arrest. A temporary oversight committee stepped in, then a full audit. Corin's office worked fast. 2 more board members were subpoenaed for obstruction. Ed ruled and resigned before they could vote to censure him. As for Orla, she was formally charged with 2 counts of felony negligent homicide, tampering with safety structures, and willful violation of municipal fire ordinances. Her trial was set for the fall. Last I heard, her attorney was trying to negotiate a plea. I wouldn't be in the courtroom. I'd already said everything I needed to. So had the nest. They held the dedication on a Sunday. Desmond spoke first. His voice was flat, but his hands shook as he read. He didn't make excuses for what he hadn't said before. He didn't need to. Just standing there beside the memorial, owning the part he played, was enough. Then the mayor spoke, briefly, about community responsibility and structural failure and fire code reform. But I didn't hear most of it. I was staring at the 2 copper nameplates bolted to the eastern wall. Ari Rythe, Ellen Rythe, July 3rd, 2023, Valawind Hollow Fire Memorial. I placed the final object on the inner shelf that afternoon. It was a small, scuffed sticker book, half the pages missing, the kind Ellen used to press against the nest walls, asking if the spaceship could look more like home. I set it down, turned, and let it go. Behind me, people were taking photos. Some were just standing there, eyes down, hats off. I didn't recognize most of them. I didn't need to, because that was the point. The nest wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't even theirs. It was proof. Proof that safety isn't aesthetic, that power can be measured in silence, that when no one listens, someone has to record. And I did. I still carry the original drive, not out of grief, not out of anger, out of duty. Because every time someone walks into that shelter, reads that plaque, and realizes it could have been their kids, it means my daughters didn't die for nothing. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.